Greetings, friends and brethren. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God. Have you heard the objection to the census that Luke wrote about? Do you know that there are people, Jews and others, who say the fact that Luke wrote about a census that they say didn't happen basically disproves that the Bible, you can't rely on the New Testament, you can't rely on the gospel accounts, because they say there's no historical evidence to back this up? Are you aware of that? And if somebody brings that up to you, can you answer it? Do you have any response? Other than saying, well, it's in the Bible and you believe it? And well, I'm glad you believe things that are in the Bible. A lot of people don't believe things that are in the Bible and will try to come up with reasons why you shouldn't trust the Bible. You know, we're supposed to be ready with an answer for those who ask us for the hope that lies within us. So I'm going to give you some answers, some ammunition, if you will, or responses if somebody actually brings this up. Well, first of all, we're going to start off by actually going to the book of Luke. So let's go to Luke chapter 2 and read just 5 verses. I'm going to read this from the New King James Version of the Bible for this sermonette. Starting in verse 1, Luke writes, "And it came to pass in those days that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus, the Roman emperor, that all the world should be registered." Now this didn't say necessarily all will be taxed, but it says all will be registered. This census first took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. So all went to be registered, everyone to his own city. Verse 4. "Joseph also went up from Galilee, out of the city of Nazareth, into Judea, the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David," King David, "to be registered with Mary, his betrothed wife, who was with child." So there's a lot of specific pieces of information that Luke wrote. It's a lot of details. First comment I would make is if what Luke wrote was in factual error, don't you think people at the time Luke wrote this would say, "Aha! This is not true, there was no census, this didn't happen"? Why would Luke put all these specifics down if it wasn't true? But again, people who don't want to believe the Bible, they're not going to accept that. Anyway, modern opponents of what Luke wrote basically say there was no record of an empire-wide census during the time of Augustus. Quirinius was not the governor of Syria at the time, they claim. And people wouldn't have to relocate for any census. At least those are the claims. And I've read pros and cons of this and went through various articles from different people on this. Now, first of all, it should be pointed out that Augustus himself, in his official comments, stated there were various censuses during his reign. He specifically mentioned 3 for taxation, but he also alludes that there was one for registration. Now, in ancient times, to do a census took years. You know, the Roman Empire was fairly big. Show this map here. This isn't just of the Roman Empire. But okay, here's Italy. You go from Spain all the way over into Asia here. So it was pretty big. And they didn't have the internet. They didn't have telephones, things like that back then. Now, I'd like to read something from the lawyer and historical writer Tertullian. He wrote in the late 2nd, early 3rd centuries. He says, "For none of men was a universal aggregation of spiritual credentials appropriate, except to Christ." It says, "He was accounted the root of Jesse through Mary, for he was from the native soil of Bethlehem, from the house of David. As among the Romans, Mary is described in the census, of whom is born Christ." So according to Tertullian, there was a census record that Romans had that Mary was actually listed in. And let me read something else from Tertullian. This is from this writing called Against Marcion. The first one was from a writing he has called Against the Jews. Now here's one from Against Marcion. He writes, "For to whom else could he better have imparted than such as the strangers to the Creator, especially if he didn't belong to the Creator? And how could he have been admitted to the synagogue as unknown if he wasn't yet to be apprised of his tribe, his nation, his family, and lastly, his enrollment in the census of Augustus, the most faithful witness of the Lord's nativity, kept in the archives of Rome?" So in the late 2nd century, early 3rd century, Tertullian says there is a record of the census and it is in Rome. Okay, the fact that people don't find it now doesn't mean there was not such a thing. So you've got to be careful when people say, there's no evidence. I just read you some evidence. There was a person who wrote that the records are there. Okay? And so if there was no census, he wouldn't have any reason to say that. Now, consider also that Augustus got himself a title called Pater Patrae on the 5th of February in 2 BC, which is the day of Concord on the Roman religious calendar. In his official annals, which are called Res Gestae Divi Augustae, here's what he wrote. While I was administering my 13th consulship, the Senate and Equestrian Order and the entire Roman people gave me the title Father of my Country, which is what the Pater Patrae translates from Latin to. Okay? Now, how did Augustus just get this title? It just popped up in the middle there? Probably not. Actually, for the title to be legally accurate, that the entire Roman people gave him this title, there had to be some kind of empire-wide accounting, somehow. And since he was awarded this in early 2 BC, collecting supporting data for this must have started years beforehand. And I found some other things about this. It says in 6 or 5 BC, the people in Conabaria in Spain took an oath for the safety of Augustus, as recorded somewhere in a fragmentary inscription. It would appear that this was a time of an empire-wide demonstration, including Judea, where sacrifices were made to Jehovah for the safety of Augustus, of allegiance to Augustus and his then designated heirs was orchestrated. This comes from Lewis and Reinhold's Roman Civilization, Selected Readings, Volume 2 from Columbia Press. Okay, so this is not just some Protestant or some or a Christian or somebody just making something up. I mean, this is basically a secular source confirming this. Now, also, I found something else. It says the Armenian historian Moses of Quirinius said that the native sources he had available showed that in the 2nd year of Abgar, king of Armenia, in 3 BC, the census mentioned by Luke brought Roman agents to Armenia, bringing the image of Augustus, Caesar, which they set up in every temple. That last sentence is a verbatim quote. It implied that people there had to go to temples to register for the census. This information is very similar to that engraved on the Paphlagogian inscription that recorded the oath given to Augustus. It was sworn by various peoples in the lands and the altars of Augustus in various districts. Now, okay, so you've got it happening. We see it happening in Spain in 6 or 5 BC. So we got Spain over here. Then, in between, okay, you got Rome. Then down here, you've got the basic area of Israel, and Bethlehem is over here. Okay, now going all the way to 2 BC, you get the Armenians involved. Okay, so it took some time. It makes sense that it took some time to get this done, and different things were going on. Actually, it was 3 BC, I'm sorry, in Armenia. 3 BC it was in Armenia. So get this. We see it in Spain, 6-5 BC. Judea, probably 4 to 5 BC, because that's where Jesus was born, actually. Jesus was not actually born in the year 0. There was no technical year 0, but the guy who calculated AD and BC made some mistakes. But anyway, and then over Armenia in 3 BC, and then so what happens in 2 BC, Augustus takes his title. So it took some time for this to all get started, so this makes sense. I'll also comment that Luke said this was an enrollment or registration of some type. And Josephus referred to another type of census as well. We'll skip Josephus right now. We don't really, for that part, we don't need to go there. All right, but I'd also want to comment in the 5th century, Paulus Orosius wrote this related to Augustus Caesar. Caesar ordered a census to be taken of each and every province, that all men should be enrolled. That is the earliest and most famous acknowledgement that designates Caesar first of all men and a Roman lord of the world. In the census, men were entered individually. The first and greatest census then was made. The great nations of the whole world took an oath in one name of Caesar and were joined in fellowship through the participation of the census. So this is not some 21st century idea that someone just put all this stuff together. Now, this looks like it's talking about the decree that Luke wrote about, which again was affecting Judea in 5 or 4 BC. Now, Josephus talked about Quirinius as well, and various ones have different views about this, and saying that it's not possible that Quirinius was governor at the time, but there's a couple of problems with that as well. One is that Quirinius did have a census around 6 or 7 AD. The question is there another one? Well, when Luke wrote, he used the term first related to the census in Luke 2:1 through 5. So indicating that perhaps Quirinius was involved with at least 2 censuses, because we see this. Let me read something else. The Lapis Venitus describes a census ordered by Quirinius the Syrian. Some evidence suggests this was between 10 and 6 BC. So there was other evidence that another census was ordered. Let's say it was ordered in 6 BC, and they finally got to doing it in 4 or 5 BC over in the land of Israel. Also, there is evidence to understand that Quirinius did hold some type of position at least twice with Syria. Justin Martyr wrote something that Quirinius was a procurator, not the governor of the whole area. And Justin Martyr wrote, "Now there's a village in the land of the Jews, 35 stadia from Jerusalem, in which Jesus Christ was born. As you can ascertain from the register of the taxing made under Cyrenius," which is another word for Quirinius, the first procurator of Judea. Now, procurator governs, but isn't necessarily the governor. Hence, Quirinius' role and timing is not inconsistent with Luke's account. Now, there's another report I found. This is from a book called Archaeology of the New Testament. It says Jerry Vardaman has discovered the name Quirinius on a coin in micrographic letters, placing him as proconsul of Syria in 11 BC until the death of Herod. This evidence contributes to the support that there were 2 Quiriniuses. So there's 2 different possibilities. One, we have Quirinius who was there twice, or 2 different Quiriniuses. Either way, there's historical evidence to back up the fact that there was somebody called Quirinius who could have been reigning or governing or a proconsul or a leader over in Syria, Judea, back at the time. So the argument is simply not true. Some critics have said that it's not feasible that he could have possibly been governor twice, but that's simply not the case. I'll also comment that I mentioned about Josephus. He actually reported there were 2 different governors / presidents of Syria at the same time in the 1st century, named Saturninus and Voluminus. Okay, so it's logical to conclude that if there were 2 of them at the same time, there could have been 2 in Quirinius' time. All right, now some have wondered about this idea that citizens were forced to travel in a Roman census. That didn't happen. But again, remember, Luke is talking about a conquered people. Now, the late Dr. Ernest Martin wrote a few things that are applicable here. Some of his writings have some issues with it. This, I think, is helpful. It says, in the oath of loyalty mentioned by Josephus is what brought Joseph and Mary to Bethlehem. Then it makes sense why Mary had to accompany Joseph. In a regular census, Mary would not have needed to go with Joseph, nor would Joseph need to travel so far. Some have suspected that both Joseph and Mary were since they were descendants of David, they were legitimate claimants to the throne of Israel, had such a throne existed, it's over there. It could have easily been seen why Mary, as well as Joseph, was expected to sign the oath of loyalty to Augustus. And that would explain what Tertullian wrote, that Mary's name was listed, because normally they wouldn't have done it quite that way. Anyway, Ernest Martin wrote, all royal claimants would have had especially been singled out to give an oath of allegiance. That would have involved Mary. It was possible in Jewish circles for female descendants of David to have the rights of the kingship and their offspring. And continuing, Dr. Martin said, Luke tells us the reason why they both went there. Everyone else went to their own city, but they went because of the fact they were of the household of David. So I think that explains that. Now, anciently, I want to comment that travel requirements were not restricted to Judea. The requirement to travel to ancestral lands was actually part of Caius Vivivus Maxim's decrees when he announced the census in 104 AD. I won't read that to you, but I will tell you that we have an article at the ccog.org website about the census. It's got all this information, so some of it I'm just going to just read over. Also, there was in 48 AD, there was another census that had people move as well. And I don't have to read through all that. Again, you can go there to see it. Actually, there's one other place you can get it. This is actually from a chapter of our new book, Proof Jesus is the Messiah. Now, this is available also at ccog.org. You go to the literature tab, click under books, booklets, and you can find this particular booklet. And it's got a chapter on the census. And the reason it's in there is because it's proof Jesus is the Messiah. Because people have said Jesus is not the Messiah because of Luke's account. And that, I think, is ridiculous, but that's what a lot of people say. I should comment that the Church of Rome believes that the census took place. And it's interesting, the Catholic Encyclopedia correctly declares, quote, the census would have been impossible in the winter. And another reason, of course, to eliminate the winter for the census time is that the shepherds would not have been with the fields at night with their sheep at this time of the year. But what about this contention that there was no census? There's no historical evidence. That's simply not true. You look at the official records from Augustus, he talks about 3 censuses plus a registration. You find out that he ends up taking a title, that he's the father of their country. We see reports, not only what Luke wrote, but we see Tertullian saying, look, this stuff happened, and we've got records of it in Rome. The idea that Quirinius could not have been a governor twice or could not governor in that period of time is simply not the case. There was records to support that. As far as travel, again, there are Roman records that support the idea that conquered peoples were required to travel during the time of the census. So you're always supposed to be ready with an answer. I hope I've given you some answers. Luke's account is not a reason not to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, but is another reason to accept that Jesus was the Messiah. Do not be misled by people who do not wish to believe the Word of God. The fact that some historical records have been lost, okay, so what? It doesn't disprove the Bible at all. There is sufficient evidence out there to demonstrate the veracity of what Luke wrote. You can believe this book and believe that Jesus was the Messiah. The census of Luke 2 did take place. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.